Hi, welcome everyone. So my name is Lisa Cartwright. I'm a professor of visual arts and of communication and science studies here at UCSD. And it's my tremendous pleasure to welcome you to the opening panel and reception for the two exhibitions of works by Connie Samaras, her Speculative Landscapes series. I want to begin with some thank yous. Thank you to Trish Stone, Ricardo Dominguez, Hector Bracho, Joel Palizzi, and Sarah Turner, and the Qualcomm Institute for making possible both tonight's lovely panel and reception in honor of the work of Connie Samaras, and especially for making possible the exhibition of her works here behind us in the gallery at Calit2. And also, don't miss the series that's in the hallway facing the computer banks. I'll say something very briefly about this series, but I'm going to leave it to our excellent roster of speakers this evening to talk in depth about those works. So you may have been surprised at the beginning when I said, oh, I'm a professor of visual arts and communication and science studies. So I've worked across these fields for my entire career, and I have a particular interest in artists who bring together work in gallery-based work in the fine arts, but who do that work with a research focus that takes as the object of study areas and issues that we might think of as more in the realm of science and technology. And among that growing group of artists, Connie Samaras has emerged in numerous series of her work over the past 15 years as one of the premier artists who crosses that boundary, particularly in photography and video. And we are very lucky to have her here at the University of California. She is a professor and former chair of the Claire Trevor School of Visual Arts at UC Irvine. And so it was a great surprise to me that she has not shown her work on our campus, because as one of the premier, if not the premier science campus for the UCs, this seems a logical place, and particularly with the kind of growth of the Calit and the sister Calit at Irvine and the SME initiative across science and art. It seems like we were really overdue to show and talk about the work of Connie Samaras. So this occasion follows a workshop today called Feeling Photography, and welcome back to those of you who were part of that workshop. And it also marks the opening of two exhibitions of works from 3 series by Samaras. So first I'll introduce Connie Samaras. She's a Los Angeles-based artist whose work primarily in photography and video, but also in installation and writing. She is quite an astute intellectual who critically frames her own work and the work of others. Right now she's working on the Octavia Butler archive at the Huntington and on other research-based projects. And much of her work considers geographies, political geographies, and the kind of psychological dislocations that happen when utopian geographies are imagined and when they're built, but even in the phases of building them, we can begin to see the kind of fissures and gaps that happen when, for example, human impact begins to undermine the vision for a kind of future progress embodied in the architecture. So her work is very much in the realm of what we might think of as speculative fiction, a kind of science fiction that has not just a utopian but a dystopian and a critical spin. But she brings that genre into photography and video and installation art. So she's dubbed it Speculative Landscapes. Her work has been shown widely with solo exhibitions at venues including the California Museum of Photography, V.A.L.I.S in a venue in Los Angeles, the Queensland University of Technology, the Armory Center for the Arts, and the San Francisco Art Institute. She has lectured and presented around the world with particular heightened attention to her work on Antarctica, which is featured in the gallery here this month, this quarter. And she has spoken at the Hammer Museum, LACMA, the Eton Science Fiction Conference, and the Ontario College of Art and Design, to name just a small fraction of the places where she has shown. She's the recipient of numerous grants. I'll just mention Creative Capital, the Andy Warhol Foundation, and the Getty. So we're quite honored to have her here. Here at the gallery at Calit2 are works from the series V.A.L.I.S, V.A.L.I.S, which stands for Vast Active Living Intelligence System. And this is an acronym that if you read the science fiction of Philip K. Dick, you will know what it means. Vast Active Living Intelligence System is a kind of node of a satellite network that communicates with symbols, triggering recollection of spiritual knowledge in Philip K. Dick's science fiction. So she draws from this for her title. So she has documented through the support of the National Science Foundation, she won an Antarctic Artists and Writers Grant. And so between 2005 and 2007, she made a number of trips to Antarctica to document the U.S. South Pole research stations that are there. And for those of you who are not familiar with those research stations, three structures exist there, one built in the 50s, one in the 70s, and one more recently. And each of them is in various phases of demise because of the diminishment of the ice sheet there. So they're getting buried in this kind of decomposing landscape. So her work is very much about this tendency to have a vision to build anew that becomes immersed in kind of human-altered environments in the Anthropocene. On view as well in the hallway is work from the series After the American Planet, which Samaras photographed on a research trip to Dubai during the height of the real estate boom in the UAE. She visited Dubai and documented the building of this kind of opulent landscape. But she, instead of focusing only on the gorgeous and over-the-top garish architecture, she found her way into the community of people who were doing the building, migrant workers who were working around the clock in shifts. And so the work that is on view in the hallway facing the computer bank adjacent to the gallery is from a video. It is a video. It's a five-screen installation, a multi-channel video installation of the video Magic Planet, which she made in 2009 from the Dubai series. And then finally, we invite you after the panel today and after you've had a chance to see the exhibition in the gallery here, the gallery at Calit2, we invite you to wander over to SME, to the Visual Arts Gallery at SME, where we have on view a second exhibition of works by Connie Samaras from her series Edge of Twilight. Photographed between 2011 and this year, 2016, the series was shot in an RV retirement community that is made up primarily of lesbians living in the Arizona desert, not quite off the grid, but on the edge of the grid in a pretty remote area. So we're celebrating Connie Samaras and her decades of work on built environments and her speculative dystopic utopian landscapes with short talks by three writers who have framed her work over the years and who have written about different series of hers over the years. And I'm going to introduce each separately. We are going to begin with Lisa Bloom. So Lisa Bloom is a scholar of art science and visual culture who is currently teaching at Stanford. Many of you may know Lisa Bloom from the period during which she taught here at UCSD. She is the author of most relevant for this exhibition, Gender on Ice, American Ideologies of Polar Expedition, a book that was published in 1993 about polar expeditions and the American and global imaginary of polar exploration. This book has had a major resurgence of attention and interest, and so Lisa Bloom and Connie Samaras have traveled widely around the world to talk about the social, political, aesthetic, and cultural issues relative to global warming and it's the relationship to the kind of fantasies and visions we have about the polar ice cap. Lisa Bloom is currently completing a book on anthropogenic landscapes, contemporary art, and climate change, with some work on oil and the polar region as well. So we welcome Lisa Bloom. Thank you.
So as you've learned from Lisa's introduction, Connie Samaras has been working on Antarctica and the South Pole since 2004-05, when she first traveled there with the U.S. National Science Foundation Artists and Writers Program. But as an artist, she has been drawn to communities in geographically extreme environments, Antarctica, Dubai, Las Vegas, and the U.S. Southwest Desert, that are unique and lack a conventional historical core or a conventional population makeup. Situated in the desert or on ice, these places almost appear like a tabula rasa, where various urban and community experiments are carried out, both in the past and present. Samaras' Antarctic project, called V.A.L.I.S, Vast Active Living Intelligence System, consists of photographs and 2 videos she took while on an artist residency at the American base in the Antarctic Station. And she approaches Antarctica from a deliberately anti-heroic perspective through a focus on what it means to live in such an inhospitable and thus anxiety-provoking built environment. Samaras herself uses the phrase built environment to describe her work, to invoke a critique of, quote, environment as solely about nature. Putting in the word built foregrounds the architectural and technological transformations of the environment that we tend to think of as our natural spaces. In her work at the South Pole Station, Samaras is rethinking a landscape, as Lisa mentioned, that is now on the verge of disappearance due to anthropogenic pollution, even though in the recent past its built environment, as represented by the Buckminster Fuller geodesic dome at the South Pole, function as representations of Antarctica's utopian possibilities. A common idea common idea in the 1950s was to have Antarctic cities enclosed under such glass domes, which would have made colonization of this continent possible. Samaras' photographs of a sinking Buckminster Fuller dome are metaphoric, since they suggest an end to Antarctica's long history of being separate from the world and a place of both scientific and architectural uniqueness. Fantasy, as evoked by science fiction, is key to understanding Samaras' work in these geographically extreme regions. For example, she evokes how alien the landscape is in Antarctica when she foregrounds how uncontrollable the ice is as it swallows up buildings and signs of life in photographs such as this one that's also on exhibit, titled Domes and Tunnels, and in Buried 50s Station, also on view. Like the landscape, the photographed interiors are empty and deserted. Her focus on these alien-looking buildings, combined with her emphasis on the undomestic interiors and exteriors, such as her photographs taken underneath the new Amundsen Scott Station when it was under construction, has a strangeness that is intermixed with an ordinariness, creating a dissonance with, on the one hand, the discourse of Antarctica as an untouched landscape, and on the other, a scientific utopia of the future. Neither characterization fits the Antarctica represented in her art. All of Samaras' images are found rather than staged, except for a sole photograph of a strange, empty, domestic interior inside the Buckminster Fuller Dome at the South Pole, showing 2 rows of red sleeping quarters facing each other that she slightly altered by flipping the negative, making the sleeping quarters mirror each other. Though the photograph is only slightly changed, the interior looks, in the mind of the viewer, alternately like meat lockers, future cells for monks, or worse, like a morgue. The bright red sealed bunk spaces and the dome sealing together are more easily imagined as occupied by a strange, organized cult in a science fiction film than a real place where actual scientists lived and worked. Her slight digital manipulation of this space is done deliberately to make us wonder about social relations and subjectivity itself, be it male or female, in such a strange and unearthly interior, or some of her other photographs of the Scott Amundsen station under construction, such as these. In her Antarctic photographs, Samaras' aesthetic strategy combines the everyday with the surreal to visualize settlements in extreme geographical regions in a manner that on one level evokes the rest of the world's major cities in terms of its built environment, but at the same time remains incongruous and outside of nature due to its seeming artificiality. Her aesthetic approach to the ordinary and everyday injects something more unsettling and unearthly into what otherwise appear to be fairly neutral and objective images of Antarctica's built environment with its mostly anonymous industrial structures, as in her photographs that you've just seen. Samaras understands these sites not as remote spaces that demand to be mapped, but rather as spaces closely connected to globalized economic and geopolitical forces. Her work attempts to symbolically position Antarctica in the neoliberal order of transposable postmodern architecture of new urban megacities, which is fitting as the new Amundsen Scott Station, one of the buildings she photographed, was operated at the time by a division of Raytheon, a leading company in the weapons industry. One of the consequences of neoliberalism is to impose a certain degree of uniformity to all cities. Despite Antarctica's extreme climate, the inbuilt environment there nevertheless suggests a kind of neoliberal logic emerging, as evidenced by Samaras' photos of the submerged Buckminster Fuller Dome, that makes it appear as it has been abandoned or left to deteriorate, not because it cannot be used meaningfully, but perhaps because it cannot be used profitably. Oops, okay, hold on. Okay, well, you remember the dome period. Okay. Samaras herself has written on neoliberalism and why these images of Antarctica belong in a larger series that includes photographs of the built environment in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Los Angeles, and Las Vegas, amongst other sites. She deliberately plays with the variable space between documentary and fiction that sets her images apart from the public narratives and images of the heroic age of exploration that you can see in these photographs sort of emphasize the insignificance of the so-called human struggle against the natural environment. And this is by Herbert Ponting in the early 20th century, and this is done by an Australian artist, Frank Hurley. So these are sort of typical of that era. Her photographs, Connie's photographs, represent a shift from an image of the polar regions as representative of the sublime to the present, where the Antarctic is visualized as a place of overwhelming beauty and terror, but this time as a result of anthropogenic climate change and neoliberalism. Moreover, in Samaras' images, the Antarctic is no longer seen as simply an unearthly space, but also as a space strangely fragile, one where the ice itself becomes an important entity. The built environment seems vulnerable and unstable, as in her work Domes and Tunnel, where the shifting pack ice will cover the Buckminster Fuller Dome, already slowly sinking in the permafrost, or in Antenna Field South Pole, an image of an empty Antarctic landscape that dwarfs a tiny radio antenna standing as the only sign of human habitation. So the kind of dissonance and instability is also found in her work on Dubai's urban landscape. It's significant that Samaras also presents Dubai as always under construction. And for Samaras, its incompleteness is not an indication of failure. But rather it is overbuilt, overexpanded, indicative of financial bubbles. Her aesthetic approach here also seeks to activate a science fiction imagination to interrogate the gap between what we expect to see of Dubai, touristic views that represent the landscape as an urban spectacle that is new, futuristic, and decidedly Middle Eastern, and what she found there, a cosmopolitan, corporate-looking ghost town in a desert that had already begun to feel the impact of the global financial downturn when she did this photographic project. Okay, I'm going to see if I can find the other images here, but okay, I downloaded the wrong set. Okay. All right. In both projects, Samaras' aesthetic strategy combines the everyday with the surreal to visualize spaces in extreme geographical regions on one level that appear like the rest of the world's major cities in terms of their built environment, but at the same time remain incongruous and outside of nature due to their seemingly artificiality. It is this aspect of her work on Dubai and Antarctica that links her past work with her current photographs on a lesbian RV retirement community in the U.S. Southwest desert, a project titled Edge of Twilight. Like her previous work, the project highlights both the unreality and the drab ordinariness of this landscape and built environment. But at the same time, she expresses an undeniable fascination with the kind of social experiment that has its origins in the women's movement, and it is in these kinds of improbable spaces that she imagines possible futures. Consequently, her work leverages the science fiction imagination to make us think critically about our fascination with technology and the place of relentless free market expansion in current discussions on gender, climate change, and development. At the same time, she still wants us to imagine a new aesthetics of daily life and survival at a moment when we are contemplating a foreclosed future due to the way that failed neoliberal policies have led to crisis and even misery in the U.S. and elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. That was fabulous. I'm very delighted to welcome Ken Gonzales-Day, who is a renowned photographer in his own right, and who also is someone whose work as a photographer engages with research-based questions that have led him to, like Connie Samaras, to write. And so Ken Gonzales-Day is professor of art and humanities at Scripps College here in Southern California. He's a Los Angeles-based artist. He considers the historical constructions of race and the limits of representational systems, ranging from lynching photographs to rethinking museum collections and museum display. And so some of you may know his series Erased Lynching and his series Hang Trees of California. And you may know this work if some of you have been in San Diego for a while. You may have seen the exhibition at the University Art Gallery in 2010 that followed the notorious Compton cookout. About a year later, the Visual Arts Department coordinated with faculty and other departments to mount an exhibition of the Hang Trees work and to bring Ken Gonzales-Day to speak. And so I believe that was the last occasion of his visit to UCSD. However, we learned today that he is doing scholarship and visual work around the Museum of Man in Balboa Park, and he gave us a wonderful presentation that included a discussion of that museum, so hopefully we can have him back to speak more about that project at some point. But today he is graciously here to speak about the work of Connie Samaras because they have had a very long dialogue as photographers who do research-based practice in writing, and so he has had the occasion to write about her work and publish about her work. So welcome, Ken Gonzales-Day.
Thank you. Let me just get mine. So, can you all hear me? Deep breath, everybody okay? We've been talking all day long, some of us, so we're ready for the cocktails after. So I just have a short paper, and I'm going to show you some of the images along the way. Obviously, that is me and some of the programs I'm connected with. Just to say that one of the underlying things for this paper is, and was part of the conversation earlier today, was thinking about what photography is, what it should be, how we should continue to teach it, how it fits into the fine arts, how it's understood. And when we begin to overlap it with other kinds of narratives about culture, history, the economy, it becomes much harder to get back to the photograph or without overly aestheticizing. So that said, let me aestheticize it. It is night. A single wide trailer is seen from the front. It is centered, almost deadpan in its composition. Beneath the RV's A-frame roof, there are 3 rectangular windows topped by a half-moon atrium window. It's a startling image because all the windows are covered with what appears to be brown paper. The paper completely blocks the view outward, and perhaps more to the point, it blocks the view inward. A greenish-yellow light spills across the white corrugated metal siding, a familiar, if often undesired effect caused by photographing under mercury vapor lights. Did it stay up? It's okay, it's here. It's because of the Wi-Fi. It knows I'm an alien invader in your system. A greenish-yellow light spills across the white corrugated metal siding, a familiar, if often undesired effect caused by photographing under mercury vapor lights, which Samaras has left purposefully uncorrected. There's a precarious pile of rocks and 5 painted chickens in the foreground. 3 of them appear to be roosters, but who can really be sure when you're looking at plaster garden sculptures? I don't know. Their crested heads point visitors towards a small set of stairs that lead to a covered entryway, which also doubles as a parking space. A motionless rainbow flag protrudes from a simple white pot located between the roosters and the rock pile. To the right, the edge of another covered parking space is visible and suggests a sequence of tightly placed mobile homes and campers typical of an RV park just about anywhere. The photographs resist classification. It is familiar and even a little humorous, but the image isn't the classic formalist study of light, nor is it the gritty documentary catch. Despite the subject of the RV park, it couldn't be new topographics work because it wants to address a history beyond the particulars of form. Nor does Samaras document the world in a conventional sense of decisive moment or street photography. And yet the image does speak to the challenges of representing a community that wishes to remain outside the public eye. In a very simple way, the mobile home structures suggest portraits of their owners, but Samaras strives for much more. The image and the larger project from which it came document 2 predominantly lesbian, all-women's retirement communities in the Southwest. According to Samaras, the 2 RV parks have a combined population of nearly 400 women during the high season, which is, I guess, November to March. And her research also reveals that these parks have existed possibly for decades. And as such, their existence is important to the LGBT communities everywhere. The series is entitled Edge of Twilight and takes its name from the pre-Stonewall pulp fiction novels which used Twilight to signal lesbian content to a knowing audience, just as the rainbow flag signals solidarity with and within the LGBT community today. The completed installation was also was supposed to include a video component, which has been eliminated. Okay. As Samaras notes, this project makes a radical shift in her practice, quote, from looking at the future of imaginaries of global capitalism to focusing on communities that have origins in social change movements, close quote. And these are 2 of the most recent images, which I had never seen before today, in the flesh, as it were. And they're on view in the gallery across the way. As with many of her previous projects, there is also a sense of otherworldliness generated by the slow exposures from 2 to 4 minutes as the harsh contrast of night photography. Shot on film and intentionally uncorrected, the colors shift, blend, and clash. Acid green, incandescent yellow, brown, yellow, black, and white. The palette draws attention to the industrial aesthetic of light poles, metal siding, and skirted trailers. But unlike lesbian science fiction novels that sought to discover distant planets, these women have created a world of their own, and without a billion-dollar mission into outer space, these industrially fabricated trailers are economical mobile spaceships that can travel between worlds and can survive on what may be the most hostile of planets, Earth. Samaras' work should also be seen as a meaningful example for those that wonder if we have reached the end of photography. Like the end of painting, such questions often come across as more strategic than radical, but there can be no doubt that social media, handheld devices, and digital technologies have forever altered our experience of the photograph. Images pour from screen surfaces and fill our heads, but rather than discarding all aesthetics, projects like Samaras' Edge of Twilight make it clear that there is still plenty of room for exploration right here. In Samaras' case, the work opens up a space from which to rethink more than just the work of making images. It allows the viewers to consider how economic and political mobility has served and perhaps even shaped at least one community, and demonstrates that the difference between seeing and being seen is not always as simple as updating your Facebook page. And then there's one last image. I'll just say, there's the flag as well. So many things about these images are difficult to classify, and we had this little discussion earlier in the morning trying to think about the various categories. I will just say that one of the things that I've come to determine is that the categories themselves have become really open-ended, and we really do have to come up with a way to think about photography collectively. What it'll be in the future, how it's going to function, you know, forgetting the question of film, forgetting the question of the camera, getting to the image itself. And we're going to have some time after this to talk about some of these things, so I'll end it with that. Thank you.
Really delighted that Professor Anna Joy Springer, our professor of literature here at UCSD, is joining us to speak about the work of Connie Samaras, about which she has written in experimental form and published. Professor Springer is the author of The Bird Wisher, published by Birds of Lace Press in 2009, and The Vicious Red Relic, Love, Jaded Ibis Press, 2011. She received her MFA in Literary Arts from Brown, and she's worked in a variety of forms, and so it's my great pleasure to welcome Anna Joy Springer.
It's a real pleasure to be speaking on Connie Samaras' work, and this is a piece that I wrote for a catalog of the show that happened at the Armory a 3 years ago. Yeah, and it references a seal who is Connie's guide, and you can see the seal talking to Connie, though you won't understand what it's saying, but I will interpret it for you. And taking on the what Ken just brought up, there's a term I've been thinking about all day that happens, or that's happening sort of now in experimental documentary literature, that intersects weirdly with science studies and divinatory practices, called unerasure. That I don't know if we have this also in photography, but it's the idea of unerasing things that can't, it crosses over with the speculative because it can never be known, unless you're a really good psychic, like Connie. Connie Samaras, Oracle Apostate. Having left her photo-telekinetic pack at the Dome, Connie Samaras was enjoying a rare moment of luminous desolation on an ice shelf just above the South Pole. The landscape, pooling with shadow, provided 360-degree horizontal and vertical views for ease of predator check. No people on the horizon, no machines in the sky, nothing oozing from a crevice. Beneath the 2-foot crust of ice below was the sea, muffled and drifty. A swirl of wind some 20 yards away projected a high-pitched choral call out of human range. On this, her final mission for the oneric paracorporeal arena, Connie Samaras had been unusually attuned to the subtle play of movement and stillness between responsive particles, especially as inanimate and living systems came in contact and learned each other's edges. The discharge released by such an encounter sometimes emitted a sound similar to this call. Curious, she moved mechanically toward the soft disharmony of voices scrolling out from a hole drilled into the ice. Oddly, the call emitted from the nostrils of a local inhabitant. To the so-called scientists at the dome, the animal would look like an unremarkable Weddell Seal oxygenating. But Connie Samaras recognized the legendary transformation oracle immediately. She knelt down, put her forehead to the ice. It had been rumored that the vanished transformation oracle had somehow reconfigured her frequencies so that Oppa could not hear her broadcasts now, could not even find her. Useless to them, she'd been left alone to do what? Live and die like any other creature of the faulty biosphere? Witness the inevitable melt? Why? Had she found a truly compelling reason to stay rather than returning to Oppa for decompression and reward, as Connie Samaras soon would? The grand transformation oracle was in a teleconduit trance and could not answer. A chorus of faraway voices emitted from the seal's nostrils. Quote, oracle of disquieting landscape, inverse heroics, oracle of perverse witness, oracle of distortion precision, hear us now, hear our call, skeptical, endangered, this our appeal. Stay here with us in the anticipated ruins in flesh. Oracle of intersection moment, that's what you frame. Not a swinging dialectic, no easy heroics, but an unresolved encounter between bordering conceptual planes. In just a few weeks, Connie Samaras would leave behind her leaky disguise and return to her own realm of kaleidoscopic dimensions like a good deed angel, banners, clinks, and flashes. Once home after decompression, she could free frame as she wished, conceptizing, narratizing, even being light or animating form if she wished. Framing oracle, you have already imagined staying. We will show you the daring experiment of keeping your form even as it dissolves. Stay here with us and continue the framing and transmission in new ways, not for Oppa, but for sneaking suspicion. Play cards, make art, eat nuts, defect with us, oracle of either or fucking. Oppa had wanted a story of rank distinction, tyranny, and suppliant awe, the rot at the root of human narrative. In transmitting this framing, Connie Samaras had become increasingly intrigued by the beauty of contrasting threats and moments of recollection. She framed complications and nuances without transmitting them back. She was like an actual woman, perverse in her fascination with the morbid ballet of verses. Could it be a conceptual byproduct of living with gravity as volume and mass alive? How terrible to be so in thrall. Yet she could not remain dispassionate. She framed the transmissions Oppa wanted, kept others to herself. How had the oracle apostates known? We will help each other remain unfaithful to any leader or rude consensus. We will leave each other and return. And like other corporeal creatures, at some point we will die. Some of us will explore what comes after and transmit that if we can. Surely you have seen signs of the realm of post-biological beings. Surely you have seen a ghost. There are several portals, or portals like this one, that Opa cannot see. Find the Twilight portal in the North American nuclear desert, camouflaged as a lesbian separatist elders trailer park compound. The portal opens when you shoot the rainbow banner near the cloned rooster parade. Make your way past the glowing facades, enter the trailer marked rec room. There's a smell of chlorine and coffee. We Oracle apostates often wear old lesbian disguises and are thus rendered invisible. At the poker tables, we will show you how to reconfigure your photo telekinetic equipment and provide portal maps. You are free to leave whenever you want, but come. There are very few of us left.
So thank you, Lisa, Ken, and Anna Joy. And now we'll turn to a more open format of discussion. So if the speakers could join me on the stage. If we can change the lighting a bit to bring the lighting to the table.
Maybe we can take. We've been in a workshop this morning, many of us, since 9 o'clock this morning, 10, it seems. But I want to thank everybody so much, and that was really excellent. And I wanted to see if people have questions as well. I'll just say a few words about the V.A.L.I.S show, the Antarctica work. I actually just made one trip in 2004 to the South Pole and Ross Ice Shelf, and I was there for 6 weeks. And one of the things I was very conscious of is that the South Pole is where all the, it's the clearest, cleanest place on Earth. And only 10,000 people have been to the pole since it was first discovered. But the thing is that some of the best, I don't know, I want to say best, that's not the right word, but the cosmology, the cosmologists, the astronomers that actually think about how the universe was created, a lot of the work's done there. And as many of you know, things are no longer optical, right? Science long ago ceased to be based on direct observation. So I was very keenly aware that I was working with a 19th century tool in a place with the most sophisticated visualization technologies, right? And at that point, they were installing a system to study neutrinos to, again, think about the origins of the universe. So a lot of the work that I did was really based on this notion of optical failure of photography. In other words, you think you're looking at something, but that's what you're seeing is not exactly what it is. For example, there's one image that looks like a black sea with a sunset, an orange sunset behind it, and it's actually, if you look at in the gallery, there's a blue image with a white polar, the white polar ice in front of it. When you're under 24-hour daylight, you can see in one part of the world where the sun has risen, where the sun is up, and in another part of the world where the sun has gone down. And that's, if you look at that white ice on that, you'll see on the left side it's white, and on the right side it's black. And then I shot what looks like Black Sea with a long lens aimed at which you never use a long lens in landscape photography. It's the voyeuristic lens, which the detective lens. So that's focused on the black part of where it's setting. The sun is set somewhere, and the orange background is not a sunset. It's a pollution from the contrails from the planes landing at the South Pole. And the other thing too, there's only, like as Lisa said, there's only been 3 structures built at the South Pole since the 1950s, all by the United States. It's a very interesting geographic placement for the U.S. because it's where all latitudes and longitudes meet. So if there's, and I'm sure this audience knows, Antarctica is a non-sovereign country that has, there's 17 treaties that the governance is based on, and only scientific research can be done there. No animals can be brought in. But what's interesting about the geographic South Pole is that you can't build anything there without the ice covering it over in 40 years. And the Bucky Dome was built in the 70s, and I was interested in how the idea of space, how space colonization looks to the United States over a 50 or longer than that, about a 50, 60-year period. So in the 50s, they built these wooden structures, not unlike the house kits that were sent out to the American West after the Indian cleansing to white settlers to build these white kits. So those were put up by the Navy SEALs in the 50s. So the ice covered that over. So when you're looking at the polar, again, that image is in the gallery. So when you're looking at what looks like a grand polar field, it's really the buried 50 station. The Bucky Dome now is decommissioned. They moved it out of there. In the 70s, the future of space colonization looked very simple, right? And it would be these, and it was this sort of liberal Buckminster Fuller idea of a sustainable living, right? And it was the beginning in that time, that period of the serious concerns about climate change back in the late 60s and 70s. That's been taken out, and now the new building, which, as Lisa says, Raytheon runs the polar services on all of Antarctica for the United States, and that happened under W. It used to be run by the military, but and when I was there, Raytheon was running the South Pole Station, and the food that you're served, which was frozen on the ice for 2 years, you're eating food that's been there on the ice for 2 years, was prepared by Marriott hotels. So it was a very bizarre thing to feel like you're completely off planet, but this like sort of corporate hum under everything. Yeah. I was going to say something more about there. They built a tourist landing strip next to the pole. Nobody can go into the building. It's very actually dangerous to go there because your brain can swell. It doesn't matter what your condition or what. It's a very difficult climate to go to. But my fantasy was that the runway would be used, that Marriott would build a hotel there for very wealthy people, a fat farm.
Weight loss.
Yeah, because when you're there, you have to eat 6,000 calories a day if you're outside. So literally, I'd be eating enormous cookies, and they yell at you can't diet, and you just watch the weight fall off. So that's my fantasy: marry a hotel fat farm at the South Pole. Anyway, I'll just wrap that up. But anyway, the Weddell Seal was shot on the Ross Ice Shelf, and that usually is shown in a huge projection, and the sound is very important because what happens with the piece is when the seal comes up, you're shocked, and then you go, oh my God, that's so cute. But it's an unedited loop, and it's shot, and it's constructed in the obverse to Animal Planet films, right? Where you go, there's the cute animal, but what happens is that eventually, if you just sit there and breathe with it, you start to understand it as and I usually don't speak in universals or trying to make art that way, but that it's a shared, we share the same breathing space. And that's not a cute, tiny seal. If you don't know what a Weddell seal is, it's 400 pounds. And they oxygenate, and then they can dive down for 45 minutes. And the last thing I was going to say, after the American Century, the Dubai work, the video in the hallway, which is perfect that it's across from the computer, not the mainframe computers, and the workers working. It was just as Lisa described. What I became interested was in both the workers who built the speculative landscapes that they inhabited all day long, but they could never enter in, and so that's. A lot of that work was possible because I met a driver who we were like complete opposites. He was a strict Muslim from Pakistan. When I asked, "Where are you from?" in Pakistan, he said, "The part of your country's bombing that denies that they're bombing us." And anyway, what we came together over was that he began to understand that I was clearly concerned about the labor factor in Dubai. And so he actually risked his license to drive me into like the labor camps in places where the men are turning and talking and saying, are you from, where are you from? Are you from here? I went, no. They said, are you Egyptian news? A lot of people thought I was Egyptian. And he said, well, if you're not going to use it here, I'll tell you, this is, I live here, and this place is not fit for human beings to live in. And anyway, it was a very moving, very powerful experience to go into these places. But that video is edited as a 20-minute establishing shot for a science fiction film, because a lot of current mainstream science fiction films have their establishing shots made up of 3 cities primarily, Dubai, London, and Beijing. So often it's a set for, say. But okay, that's all I have to say. Now we'll have a conversation. And maybe Anna Joy can talk about the portraits in Twilight, too, because I have not much to say. Anyway.
Right, the second.
Or if you all have questions, too.
Do you want to do this now? Do you want?
We'll wait.
Okay. Maybe we can open up the floor for questions at this point. Comments, questions.
They're here for the reception food, I can tell.
Well, maybe you could just, for those that aren't familiar with your work, spin out how those 3 projects fit together. So what drove you to want to go to Antarctica? Because most of us will probably never get to go there, and how that links together in terms of a critical engagement with photography, something like that.
I probably should have shown some of the slides that I brought, because I talked earlier today about in the late. I don't come out of a strict photography background. I didn't, have the fishing vest with all the little things in it. Ken had one. No, I'm kidding.
No, but I wanted one.
Yeah, he wanted one. And I really came to photography and video. Originally, I was trained as a painter, and for a while, I trained as an abstract painter. So that's why a lot of my work has a very painterly quality. And the work in the V.A.L.I.S work. It's also structured so it moves you between abstraction and realism, because as Lisa also tries to mention, what I'm trying to undo is the imaginary of the South Pole. And Susan Sontag, many people wrote about this years ago. But even though we've never been to many places, if we just throw out a name of a country or city or a region, we can immediately conjure it up in our heads. So our idea of reality is photographic reality. And so it's when you were talking about before with photography, it's very difficult to work against that. So, but anyway, in the late 90s, I started these images of LA, Los Angeles, and New York, and it was looking at the intersection of police, and you can see this on my website. It's called Angelic States Event Sequence. It's about the intersection of police, surveillance, and military technologies, and on the urban landscapes. And so that began a 10-year series looking at the future imaginaries of neoliberalism and hypercapital. So from those angelic states images, somebody who was with the Polar Services encouraged me to apply because of the way they looked to the South Pole Artists and Writers Program. I was accepted by the NSF to do that. which was very intense because if any of you are here and have traveled on NSF grants to Antarctica, you know it's enormously expensive to send you there. Also, enormously expensive to send anybody to the South Pole. I mean, it was hundreds of thousands of dollars. And also, what's quite interesting, all these other countries like New Zealand, Italy, you name it, Russia, they happily send artists and writers, right, on this. But at the U.S. stations, often we were said to us, people say, well, what are you doing here? Why are you taking a bed away from a scientist? And a person I became friends with who's a British writer and BBC reporter, in a very polite, calm way, said, just why do you think then that science is the most exalted form of knowledge, right? So, which was a good thing. But after Antarctica, Dubai was the obvious next thing. And you know, when I go to places, it's usually they go through something bad. Like when I moved to Detroit, it was the beginning of the end of the auto industry. When I moved to Los Angeles, it was the end of the aeronautics industry. When I went to Dubai, it was a worldwide financial downturn. 2008, 2009. I don't know what's going to happen to UCSD after I leave here. And then after that, I was invited by the New Mexico Museum of Art in Santa Fe to photograph Spaceport America, which is the first commercial outer spaceport being built in the world. So I became interested in these different kinds of imaginaries, basically.
Not unlike UCSD itself, right?
Exactly.
Who, you know, I was just fact checking, but Jacobs School of Engineering here has a corporate affiliates program that's chaired by a guy who runs Raytheon or is part of Raytheon, and Mark Ambrose, the executive director of Integrated Defense Systems, is helping our students find work and supporting their practice here. And I don't, that's what happens here too. This is also a future imaginary, in this space itself, also part of that future imaginary. So it makes so much sense to me that your work would be here. Yeah, exactly. Commenting on and the relationship between arts and knowledge production, not as separate from, but as blended in with notions of utopia and global capital.
Yeah. You know, I should say here that there's a former professor from here, Adrienne Yannick, that I guess about 10 years ago when Calit2 opened, she did a performance film event called Spec Flick that involved the grounds around Calit2, actors embedded in Calit2 we were scripted in like a futuristic tale.
The tale of when the UC system would be free to everyone, but no one would be allowed to leave the building. So all of the students would be doing their research as labor for the university, and there would be little dings throughout the day about when to take your meds or when to go for a walk. And all of those of us outside were using the old cast-off technology. We weren't allowed to come inside, but maybe there was going to be like a rush on the door or something, and that's how it was set up. Yeah. Yeah, it was fantastic. And that was for the opening of this building.
Yes.
So it was like this, I don't even know how many times ironic it is once it starts, because it's also, we're like, I don't know, who is it, AT&T? Who sponsored this building?
Qualcomm.
Qualcomm, but
Yeah, it's been on everything.
it's been on, oh yeah. I tried on, but there were cameras that she was using the cameras that are part of the building to do surveillance and facial recognition stuff as part of the show. And it was like the first use of them. I mean, one of the reasons why I love the Twilight piece, I'll stop if anyone wants to interrupt.
No,
but
please, we're rolling.
It's because to me that piece is some of the things people were talking about today was what's outside the frame, or like articulating by pointing to an absence or an erasure, or framing the shadow or something, and that piece in relation. Your other work is so obviously about institutions, you know, and I think about the lesbians in the desert. Like, first of all, I don't know if it's true. Right? It could be staged. You act like a spy. You go in costumes. You are like a sneaky, secretive, that you go out and make things. So I don't know what's fiction and what's not fiction. But I know that a bunch of old dykes in the desert were not supposed to happen. Right? That was like not allowed. Yeah. And it got under the radar, and it's happening if it's real. Right? If it's not real, it's speculative, right? And there's no way for me to know because it's secret. Yeah. And so some of the things that your work brings together here is like the beauty of the hidden and the secret and the unnameable and the spying. And it's sort of like there's so much intelligence community stuff that comes through the UCs and comes through the like best colleges in the United States. It's like, and so like this alternate spying or counter spying. It's why I wrote the story the way that I did, to imagine that there might be a possibility of escaping, the one kind of spying for one that's better. Which might be just fiction.
Genius.
That's great. Okay, questions, comments for Connie Samaras or for anyone else on the panel? So for those of you who are seeing work like this for the first time, work by other artists who are kind of more present in a level of sort of televisual visibility, like Edward Burtynsky or Salgado. I wanted to comment that you might look at the work and think, oh, these are beautiful photographs of architecture, in Antarctica. But some of the stories, Connie, that you have told us about the conditions of shooting and how you use your lens and what it is that you focus on reminds me that you do two things that are radically different from those two artists, Burtynsky and Salgado. And the first is you really pay attention to the human scale, not to show how something that's grand or something about sort of just big capital or labor in mass, but you show human experience, showing us the little bunkers where scientists sleep. There's something about that is really akin to showing us the RVs, where women are building little communities, little homes, and it brings them both to the same level of scale. Because I think for scientists who do this kind of field work, it isn't glorious and it isn't magnificent. Yeah, it might be beautiful to look outside, but it can be exhausting. And you can feel like you're locked in your cubicle and you're locked in your space. So I think you really touch on the human scale in a way that most other photographers don't. And your willingness to use the lens and use your equipment in ways that show us things that really scientists tend to know and look at, like the day-night divide question. So we're not just seeing a pretty landscape that looks spectacular and glorious. We're seeing something that somebody who uses a camera scientifically might really try to capture. And I think that's very unique for an artist to use the camera that way. So I hope as we kind of move on and go through the exhibitions that we look closely at some of those details and those ways of working that Connie has pointed us to and that Ken and Lisa have talked about in their work, but also to think about the kind of fictional and visionary ways that Anna Joy has invited us to see the work, so that we can think about Connie as a kind of dystopic oracle. So one last opportunity for questions.
We're almost to the food.
Yeah.
And the warmth of and you can see the seal.
Oh, question, great. Erica.
Oh, forget it. I can't hear you.
Planning to revisit.
I'll rephrase. I'll project it. So Professor Erica Cho is asking if Connie Samaras is interested or will revisit some of the cities and spaces that she's photographed in the past.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, the one thing I'd love to do is go back to Antarctica and film the Amundsen Scott Station now, because I was thinking about what what you were just saying, Lisa, about these spaces. This Lisa, and back to you. The Bucky Dome and the RV park are actually disappearing kind of spaces, or they're invisible, but a lot of people in Los Angeles, and I'm sure this is true here too, have talked about this sort of like neoliberal paintbrush that's taking over cities, and LA is just becoming, there's a wonderful writer, Linnell George, and if you haven't read her, you should look her up. She's a wonderful journalist. She wrote for a long time for the LA Times and LA Weekly, and she's also part of this Octavia Butler project I'm working on. And Linnell talks about having grown up in Los Angeles, and that she's homesick for her own city while being in her city. So there's this loss that people are feeling everywhere. And the thing is that's stunning is that they've cleaned out the South Pole, and that the new Emerson Scott building is like two W's, the base back to back, and now it's patinaed completely black. So it's really meant for it's shot from the air. It's really meant for a photographic kind of picture. So it looks like a stealth bomber sitting right on the end of the South Pole, and that's quite intense. And when I was there, you couldn't live in the Bucky Dome because all the station managers and the people running the station wanted to be in there because it was so qualitatively different from being in the Emerson Scott building. The only way I can describe it was magical, right? Because you've got the light from the dome covering the light from these red buildings in these tiny spaces that people would put fairy lights in. And then the new station, I felt like I was on the Starship Enterprise that had collided with an OC shopping mall, and that there was no way you could leave a mark on anything, right? Like if you just like took your hands like this, it would just go, nothing is going to ever change and show that you were here. Whereas people would design their own spaces in the Bucky Dome, and you'd inherit that, and you felt. Maybe that's a good place to end on. And oh no, one more question. Oh yes. Yes.
Technology vis-a-vis the forms of visualization that science uses, and I think maybe you intended it as a way of framing how science thinks itself. But I'm wondering about opticality and post-opticality, and how those of you who work with photographic material think about that, and also vis-a-vis your interest in military technology, where most of this stuff develops for other forms of science. I'm not even sure if I want to say, I caught my linguistic construction. I don't know if militarism should be called a science, but
they would call it.
It's pushed by that.
Yeah. I'm just curious. Can I talk about that?
That's your project.
The New Mexico series is an interesting one in light of that.
Yeah. It's complicated. It's complicated. Like I was saying earlier, that there is a really emphasis now on photographic materiality and looking at the fact of that it's very difficult, I think, to work with ocular and lens-based work that deals with representation. And I don't know if this is really answering your question, but maybe this is where I run out of steam. But I think for me, there's ways that you can do things that take apart literally and make you understand that the the way you're seeing work is already predetermined for you. For example, let's go analog, okay, before digital. Anybody who's ever gone into a dark room knows that your paper's 8 by 10 or 11 by 14, and there's all these set sizes that you buy paper in. And if you think about it, those go back to all of that was developed for science, right? The analog technology. So an 8 by 10 sheet of paper was developed for the CIA, police departments, because it could be filed, right? So the critiques of photographic materiality are very interesting because you think of that. And so now in current photography, even though I work on film, everything's digitized past a point. Those prints would not be chemically done in a dark room anymore. They're all already predetermined by digital technologies that output. So then we start to think things look a certain way. So when you go to take a picture on your iPhone, right, you can only do so much. I know you can put the little sepia thing on it, and and there's these filters, but it's already pre-designed how you're going to visualize something. So working representationally at all is very difficult. So the way I try to mitigate that is through framing, and also, and again, what Ken ended up saying about the Twilight series, like it's not as simply as updating, your Facebook page. That I guess it's very much about a kind of emotional connection to things that are disappearing, that are being lost, that aren't being seen anymore. The assumption that everything's being seen, and the fact that when I first started doing those series, like. Oh yeah, that's a beautiful spectacle. One thing I didn't show, the thing that started this whole series off for the critique of future imaginaries was I was washing dishes, and I was about to do a residency in South Korea, and all the news had been talking about the North Korean missiles pointing at South Korea, and I thought I should really do something about that. And then all my neighbors started screaming, and traffic stopped outside, and everybody's running outside, and this was in 1998, and the military was doing the first test of the Star Wars defense system, where they sent a Scud missile out from 3,000 miles in the Pacific Ocean and intercepted it with a Minuteman missile disarmed 300 miles north of Los Angeles. And they decided to do it, not tell anybody, and they decided to do it at sunset, which is magic hour, over the skies of Los Angeles, also rush hour. And they knew we would be shocked and awed. This was 1998, taught by this cloud of the oil spill from the collision of the things created this beautiful trail of rainbow color, oil in the sky. And all my neighbors are going, this is the space aliens. They're making first contact with us. And I said, we're looking at LAX, and that's, maybe two planes collided. They go, no, this is Los Angeles. They're aliens. And but just like the dumbness, of some of the people I lived around, the stupidity, and the fact that in this country that we saw this like changing landscapes where it was military and entertainment. There's something at USC called Creative Technologies, and it's a collaboration between the film industry and the military. And basically, it's a development of nanotechnologies and various technologies, virtual reality. A lot of things have been done there, and so when the military, I don't know, I think I'm getting off the track, sorry. But when the military wanted the first nanotech institute at MIT, who did they go to? They went to the film industry and saying, we can't even think about how to use this stuff, script us something. And then I remember reading this one interview with a general saying, oh my God, we're going to develop something where people can leap 20 feet in the air and the troops will be invisible and they're leaping at you 20 feet in the air. Can you imagine that? And I thought, if some, army's leaping at you far away, invisible 20 feet in the air, it's not going to mean. It's just like, so this is like, around terrorism and things like that, they're always consulting with the film industry. So there's a way that this is like part of our external lives now, and, as well as the, it's that we accept these things, like just, oh, yeah, that's the way it should look. And anyway, so I think that's where, for me, depiction is a powerful thing still to do.
Right.
Was it really? I'm just babbling because I'm exhausted and I really hope there's sugar.
Okay.
I don't drink, but I want to.
Well, was there another?
No, I was going to thank people.
Yep.
Thank you. I want to thank Lisa Cartwright so much for this opportunity. And just a word about Lisa. No, I'm not done. But Lisa is one of the most generous scholars I've ever met. I mean, we all are interested in, all of us scientists, artists, humanities people, for the life of the mind.
Well, I have to thank you, Connie, for taking the risk of having someone who is not a curator touch your work and hang it.
No, that was great. I was barking
so
the whole time, face to face.
Connie was very gracious about having someone who hasn't curated since 1991 curate these shows. So thank you, Connie Samaras, and thank you, Lisa Bloom, Ken Gonzales-Day, Anna Joy Springer. And thanks also to the Qualcomm Institute, especially to Trish Stone, Hector Bracho, and to the Department of Visual Arts and the UC Humanities Research Institute, who helped us to support this day with a research conference prior to the events this evening. So we're looking forward to chatting with everyone over refreshments graciously provided for us.
Thank you, Trish Brown. Thank you, Trish Brown. And Hector.
Trish Stone, thank you. Yes, very much.